The sound of my phone vibrating against the wooden nightstand jolted me awake at 2:17 a.m. I knew exactly who it was before I even looked at the screen. Mom. Again. The third time this week. I stared at her name flashing on my phone, my thumb hovering over the answer button as tears welled up in my eyes. I was exhausted not just from being woken up in the middle of the night, but from years of being the family safety net. Emma, thank God you answered. Mom's voice cracked through the speaker. Your brother's been arrested again. I need you to come bail him out. I don't have the money right now. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility crushing my chest. My entire adult life had been spent solving everyone else's problems. Tonight, something inside me finally snapped. I can't do this anymore, I whispered, my voice barely audible. What do you mean you can't? He's your brother. Family helps family. Her tone shifted from desperate to accusatory in an instant. My hand trembled as I clutched the phone tighter. I've drained my savings account 3 times this year for him. I've missed work to drive Dad to doctor's appointments. I've co-signed loans I'm still paying off. I'm drowning, Mom. So you're just going to abandon us? After everything we've done for you? The guilt trip right on cue. I hung up without another word and turned my phone off completely. For the first time in my 32 years, I chose myself. And it felt like both a betrayal and a liberation. Growing up in the Wilson family meant understanding your role early on. Mine was simple: be the responsible one. While my younger brother Tyler got endless second chances and my older sister Melissa escaped to California the moment she turned 18, I stayed in our small Connecticut town, just 15 minutes from my parents' house. I remember the day I graduated with my nursing degree. As my classmates celebrated with champagne and dreams of the future, I rushed from the ceremony to the hospital where Dad was recovering from his first heart attack. My cap and gown were folded neatly in the trunk as I sat beside his bed, helping him fill out insurance paperwork. Mom patted my hand and said, "What would we do without our Emma? Always so dependable." Dependable. That word followed me everywhere like a shadow. It wasn't a compliment, it was an expectation, a job description I never applied for. My apartment became the family bank, therapist's office, and emergency room. Tyler needed money for rent after blowing his paycheck on whatever addiction had him that month. Mom needed emotional support after her fights with Dad. Dad needed someone to manage his medications and drive him to appointments. Meanwhile, my own life remained on pause. The promotion I turned down because it required travel. The relationship that ended because I couldn't give him the attention he deserved. The savings account that never grew past $1,000. I was living everyone else's emergencies while my own dreams collected dust. The breaking point hadn't come suddenly. It had been building for years, brick by brick, missed opportunity by missed opportunity, until I could no longer see anything but the wall of obligation surrounding me. The weeks following my midnight rebellion were warfare. My phone accumulated 37 missed calls and 62 text messages, each one more desperate or angry than the last. Your brother might go to jail because of you. Your father's blood pressure is through the roof from stress. How can you be so selfish? I went to work, came home, and tried to ignore the voice in my head telling me I was a terrible daughter, a horrible sister. But another voice, newer, softer, but growing stronger, whispered that I deserved a life too. The final straw came on a rainy Tuesday. I was leaving the hospital after a brutal 12-hour shift when I spotted Tyler leaning against my car in the parking lot. "Nice of you to finally show your face," he scoffed as I approached. "Mom's a mess because of you." I clutched my umbrella tighter. "I've been working, Tyler. Some of us have responsibilities." "Yeah, and abandoning your family isn't one of them," he snapped. "I needed that bail money. I almost lost my job because you decided to have some kind of selfish breakdown." I stared at my brother, 30 years old, but still living like a teenager, still expecting everyone else to clean up his messes. "Did you bring the $7,000 you borrowed last year? Or the $3,500 from Christmas? Or maybe the $12,000 I paid for your rehab that you walked out of after 3 days. His face darkened. That's low, Em. You know I've been struggling. We're all struggling. I shouted, surprising both of us with my volume. The difference is I'm struggling because I've been carrying all of you. He grabbed my arm as I tried to get into my car. Don't you dare talk to me like that. You think you're better than us because you've got your little nursing job and your apartment? You're nothing special. You owe us. Those last 3 words echoed in my mind like a gong. You owe us. For what? For being born into this family? For being reliable? For caring? No, I said quietly, pulling my arm away. I don't owe you anything anymore. I've paid any debt 100 times over. As I drove away, I could see him in my rearview mirror, still shouting, his figure growing smaller until he disappeared completely. 3 days after the confrontation with Tyler, I stood outside a real estate office, my hands shaking as I signed a lease for an apartment in Boston 2 hours and a psychological universe away from my family. I had applied for and accepted a position at Massachusetts General Hospital with a substantial raise and advancement opportunities. When I returned home to pack my things, I found my mother sitting on my couch. She'd used the emergency key I'd given her years ago. So it's true, she said, pointing to the stack of flattened moving boxes in the corner. You're really leaving. I set my purse down slowly. Yes. I've accepted a job in Boston. Without discussing it with us? Without considering what this means for your father's care? For the family? Her voice quivered between anger and disbelief. The old Emma would have apologized immediately, would have reconsidered, would have put everyone else first. But that Emma was fading, making room for someone new. Mom, I'm 32 years old. I don't need family approval to make career decisions. This isn't about a career. This is about abandoning your responsibilities. She stood up, her small frame vibrating with anger. Your father and I gave you everything. We sacrificed for you, and this is how you repay us. The words hit their target. I felt the familiar guilt rising, but I pushed it back down. What exactly did you sacrifice for me, Mom? You've been taking from me since I was old enough to give. My time, my money, my chances at happiness, all of it sacrificed on the altar of family obligation. How dare you, she gasped. After all we've done. What have you done except use me as your personal assistant, bank, and emotional support animal? My voice grew stronger with each word. I love you. I love this family. But I'm dying here, can't you see that? I'm disappearing piece by piece, and none of you even notice because you're too busy taking whatever's left. Mom grabbed her purse and headed for the door. When you come to your senses, you know where to find us. If you ever even cared about this family at all, you'll realize what a terrible mistake you're making. The door slammed behind her with such force that a picture fell from the wall and shattered on the floor. It was a family photo from Christmas 3 years ago. Everyone was smiling except me. I hadn't even noticed until now. As I packed my apartment that night, each object triggered a memory of sacrifice. The dent in my dining table from when Tyler crashed at my place for just a couple weeks, that turned into 6 months. The medical textbooks I'd bought for a nurse practitioner program I had to drop out of when Dad needed bypass surgery and someone had to coordinate his care. The dusty yoga mat from the classes I never had time to attend. I remembered my 25th birthday when I'd planned my first real vacation in years, a solo trip to Maine to stay at a bed and breakfast by the ocean. 2 days before I was set to leave, Mom called to tell me that she and Dad were having serious problems and needed me to come mediate. I canceled my non-refundable reservation and spent my birthday weekend sitting at their kitchen table, listening to them argue about the same issues they'd been fighting about since I was a child. When I suggested they try marriage counseling, Dad had left. Why would we pay a stranger when we have you, Emma Bear? I remembered Tyler's DUI 3 years ago, how I'd used my vacation days to drive him to court appearances and community service. How he'd promised to pay me back as soon as things turn around. I remembered Melissa's rare visits home, how everyone walked on eggshells around her while simultaneously dumping their problems on me. "Don't bother your sister with this," Mom would say. "She's only here for a few days." As if my time, my life, was somehow less valuable. I sat on my bedroom floor surrounded by half-packed boxes and allowed myself to cry for the life I'd put on hold, for the woman I might have been if I hadn't been so busy being what everyone else needed. The day before my move, I met with Dr. Rivera, a therapist I'd started seeing secretly 3 months earlier. She was the first person who had ever validated my feelings about my family, the first one who used the term emotional caretaking to describe my role. "How are you feeling about tomorrow?" she asked as I settled into the now familiar chair in her office. "Terrified," I admitted. "Part of me is still convinced I'm making a horrible mistake. That I'm being selfish and cruel." She tilted her head. "Would you call a person selfish for putting on their own oxygen mask before helping others on a plane?" "That's different," I said automatically. "That's an emergency." "And what would you call the situation you've been living in?" "You're emotionally and financially depleted. Your anxiety levels are through the roof. You've put your entire life on hold to support people who are capable of supporting themselves but choose not to." I stared at my hands. "They're family." "Yes, they are. And healthy families don't drain one member dry while everyone else takes. Healthy families have reciprocity." She leaned forward. "Emma, in all the years you've been supporting your family, when was the last time any of them supported you?" The question hung in the air as I searched desperately for an example. There must be something, some time when they had put me first. But the silence stretched on, answering for me. "The guilt you're feeling isn't because you're doing something wrong," Dr. Rivera said gently. "It's because you're breaking the unspoken family rule that your needs come last. That's not guilt, that's growth. And it's going to be uncomfortable." "What if they never forgive me?" My voice cracked on the words. "What if they do? What if this is exactly what needs to happen for real change to occur in your family system?" She handed me a tissue. "But more importantly, what if you finally learn to forgive yourself for having needs and dreams of your own?" As I left her office for the last time, she handed me a small frame containing a quote, "The price of anything is the amount of life you exchange for it." I held it carefully, knowing exactly where it would go in my new apartment. Boston embraced me like an old friend I hadn't realized I'd been missing. My new apartment was small but entirely mine. My job challenged me in ways that made me remember why I'd become a nurse in the first place. For the first time in years, I was thriving. 6 weeks after my move, I received a letter from an unfamiliar law firm in Connecticut. My hands trembled as I opened it, certain it was some new family crisis seeking resolution. Instead, I found myself staring at a copy of my parents' will from 15 years ago, along with a more recent amendment. A sticky note from the attorney read, "Ms. Wilson, your brother brought these documents to our attention with concerns about recent changes. We are legally obligated to inform all parties mentioned in prior versions." The original will had divided my parents' modest estate, their house, and savings equally between Tyler, Melissa, and me. But the amendment, dated just 3 years ago, told a different story. My share had been reduced to a token $5,000, with the explanation that Emma has received significant financial support throughout her adult life. The room seemed to spin as I processed what I was reading. Significant financial support? I had given them tens of thousands of dollars over the years. I had paid for repairs on their house, covered Tyler's debts, contributed to their bills when things were tight. I called the attorney the next morning. "Can you clarify something for me?" I asked after introducing myself. "This amendment mentions financial support I've received from my parents. Do you have any documentation of that?" "Yes," he replied. "Your parents provided statements showing regular transfers to your account over the past decade, totaling approximately $95,000. My blood ran cold. "That's impossible. I've never received money from them. I've been supporting them." There was an uncomfortable pause. The transfers were documented from a joint account in the names of Robert Wilson and Emma Wilson. The joint account. The one Dad had insisted I open with him when I was 22 in case of emergencies. The one I dutifully deposited money into every month to help with their expenses. The one I hadn't closely monitored because I trusted my father. He had been using my own money to support me on paper, creating a false narrative of parental generosity while simultaneously punishing me in their will for it. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd experienced before. This wasn't just taking advantage of my giving nature, this was calculated manipulation. The revelation about the will broke something fundamental in me. For days, I moved through my new life like a ghost, questioning every memory, every sacrifice, every time I'd put my family before myself. Had any of it been real? Had they ever loved me, or had I just been useful to them? I ignored the increasingly frantic calls from my family. Tyler, suddenly concerned about how Mom and Dad are treating you. Mom, demanding to know why I'd contacted their attorney. Dad, leaving voicemails that swung between defensive anger and tearful apologies. Instead, I threw myself into creating a life that was truly mine. I joined a hiking group that explored the trails around Massachusetts every weekend. I enrolled in a nurse practitioner program, attending evening classes after my shifts. I went on awkward first dates and exhilarating second ones. I made friends who didn't need anything from me except my company. One Sunday morning, as I sat in a small cafe near my apartment sketching the Boston skyline, another forgotten hobby reclaimed, my phone lit up with a text from Melissa, the sister who had escaped years before me. I heard what happened. I'm in town for work. Can we meet? 3 hours later, we sat across from each other at the same cafe, two women connected by blood and divided by experience. I'm sorry, were the first words out of her mouth. I should have warned you years ago about what they were doing to you. Why didn't you? I asked, not accusingly but genuinely curious. She stared into her coffee. Because I was a coward. Because I got out and I didn't want to get pulled back in. Because I told myself you were stronger than me, that you could handle it. I wasn't stronger, I said quietly. I was just more willing to disappear. Melissa reached across the table and took my hand. You're not disappearing anymore, though. I barely recognized you when you walked in. You look alive. We talked for hours, filling in the gaps of our separate journeys. She had known about the will, about Dad's manipulation of the joint account. She had her own stories of manipulation and emotional blackmail. But unlike me, she had chosen complete separation rather than trying to help from a distance. They're not going to change, Emma, she said as we finally prepared to leave. But you have. And that's everything. 3 months after moving to Boston, I returned to Connecticut for the first time. Not to visit my family, but to close the joint account and retrieve the last of my belongings from a storage unit. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. As I pulled into the bank parking lot, I spotted my father's car. My heart hammered in my chest as I considered turning around, avoiding the confrontation. But the new Emma, the one who was learning to stand her ground, steered me through the doors. Dad was at the counter, his back to me. He'd lost weight, his shoulders more hunched than I remembered. When he turned and saw me, his face went through a rapid series of emotions: shock, joy, wariness, shame. Emma, he said, his voice breaking slightly. You're here. Not for long, I replied, maintaining a safe distance. I have business to take care of. He nodded, glancing at the banking slips in his hand. Your mother will want to see you. We all do. Things haven't been the same without you. I imagine not, I said coolly. Who's been bailing out Tyler? Who's been driving you to appointments? Who's been listening to Mom complain for hours? It must be very inconvenient to lose your support staff. His face flushed. That's not fair, Emma Bear. We miss you, not what you did for us. Really? I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Is that why you've been documenting my own money as gifts from you? Is that why you amended your will to punish me? Because you value me so much as a daughter. The color drained from his face. You found out about that? Yes, Dad, I did. And do you know what? I don't even care about the money. What hurts is that you were building a case against me while I was sacrificing everything for this family. You were planning to tell the world what a taker I was, when all I ever did was give until there was nothing left. He reached for me, but I stepped back. We can fix this, he pleaded. We'll change the will back. We'll close the account. Whatever you want. What I want isn't something you can give me, I said, feeling surprisingly calm. What I want is the last decade of my life back. What I want is parents who would never have done this in the first place. As I turned to walk away, he called after me, his voice cracking with desperation. We need you, Emma. The family is falling apart without you. I paused, looking back at him one last time. That's not my responsibility anymore. And maybe it never should have been. A year passed. Seasons changed. I completed my nurse practitioner certification and accepted a leadership position at the hospital. The small apartment gave way to a cozy condo with a balcony where I grew herbs and watched the sunrise. I fell in love with a kind emergency room doctor who understood boundaries and respected mine. Occasionally, updates about my family filtered through to me via Melissa, who had cautiously rebuilt a relationship with them. Mom had finally joined a support group for spouses of heart patients. Dad's health had stabilized under the care of a competent home health nurse. Tyler had, surprisingly, stepped up in some ways, though he still struggled with consistency. On my 34th birthday, a package arrived at my door. Inside was a handmade quilt and a letter from my mother. I've been working on this for months, she wrote. 1 square for every year of your life. I realized too late that we never really saw you, Emma. We saw what you could do for us, but not who you were becoming. Not the incredible woman you already were. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not sure I deserve it. But I want you to know that your leaving forced us all to grow up in ways we should have decades ago. Your father and I are in counseling. Tyler is 6 months sober. We're learning, too late perhaps, how to be a family that lifts each other up instead of draining one person dry. You were always the strongest of us, not because you carried our burdens, but because you finally had the courage to put them down. I ran my fingers over the quilt squares pieces of my childhood dresses, my graduation gown, fabric from the home I grew up in. For the first time since I'd left, I allowed myself to cry for what might have been, for the family we could have been all along. That evening, my boyfriend found me on the balcony, wrapped in the quilt despite the warm spring air. Your mom? He asked, sitting beside me. I nodded. She's trying. They all are. Are you going to respond? I leaned my head against his shoulder. I don't know yet. Part of me wants to. Part of me is still afraid of being pulled back into old patterns. Whatever you decide, he said, it'll be because it's right for you, not because it's what they need or expect. I smiled, realizing the truth in his words. The greatest gift I'd given myself wasn't the physical distance from my family. It was the emotional permission to make choices based on my own well-being. Whether I eventually rebuilt relationships with them or maintained the separation, the choice would be mine, made from strength, not obligation. Some family trees need to be pruned so the healthiest branches can flourish. In walking away, I didn't just save myself, I gave my family the opportunity to grow in ways they never would have if I'd remained their emotional crutch. Sometimes the most profound act of love is the courage to break a destructive cycle, even when it means being seen as the one who shattered the illusion of family harmony. I lost the family I thought I needed to support, but in the process, I found the woman I was always meant to be.